Mere intentions cannot bring about a change. Everyone must be prepared to play his or her part. Intentions become movements when the first few dare to come out into the open and endorse the righteousness of the intentions. These are the words of Mr. Dharmalingam Venugopal, activist, director of the Nilgiris Document Centre, founder of the Save Nilgiris campaign, and the man who brought to life the contributions of John Sullivan in the founding of the Nilgiris back in 1821, over 200 years ago. Let's find out what his fascinating career and life has been about. It's a real honor to have you on the show, Mr. Dharmalingam Venugopal. And I thought this show could be about your career, which has been wonderful in terms of ensuring that the Nilgiris, the pristine nature of the Nilgiris is retained. But can you tell us how, in childhood, while you grew up here, what were the kind of influences that made a difference to you?
Oh, nice to be in your show, Mr. Venugopal. And I really can't, nothing was planned and nothing was kind of, as normally they say, inspired, or it just happened. Probably the influences were there, which I didn't realize till the time came. I was born and brought up in Ooty. Though I'm a Badagas, belong to the community. Normally they're all brought up in their villages. But for some reasons and because of my father's profession, we had to grow up in Ooty. But that may be an added kind of inspiration for me in my later work. Ooty has just completed 200 years of its modern history. And I was lucky to bring out that publication on behalf of the government. And there I brought in how much these Britishers and even the tribes, how much they loved it and why they did it. It has just happened, the God has created the place. And as we grew up there, having a kind of natural love for the place. Not only the place, the people. And we had a different kind of thing, that I realized only I left the hills. Probably those things were working within me. So when the time came to kind of give back, then it comes spontaneously.
Right, very true. Can you give me some indication of what your educational journey was like, and where was your first job?
I studied in the local school. See, my schooling, we were 5 of us, and my father was a journalist, and we didn't have much of kind of resources, so we were happy to study in the local primary school. Then later, I went to the local municipal high school for my higher education, school education. Then, luckily, at that time, years, the Ooty Arts College, which had just completed 70 years. So that was a great boon to the people like me, students like me at that time. So we were able to complete, I was able to complete my graduation at the Ooty College. Then after that, I went to the Madras Christian College for 2 years to complete my post-graduation in economics.
Okay. And then what happened? What were the kind of events that transpired?
I was on a kind of, by nature, I was a very, very playful character. So I never had an idea of what I'm going to do in life. I never bothered also. So as long as I was able to, I was crazy about playing football. Then later, the game of snooker was added to it. So all that time I was happy playing around. So I thought life will take care of itself. So at some point, then I had to go to work. Then I said, Nilgiri is difficult to find a job. So I moved to Chennai. So Chennai, I worked with some research institute for some time. Then I got a small opening in the newspaper, The Hindu. Then
Hmm.
I worked there for about 6, 7 years, and that was a good
Okay.
experience to learn about how a newspaper is made, how the archives are maintained, all that kind of thing. It was a great experience. Then I
Do you
joined the.
remember some stories about a particular news item that you covered or a story that you wrote, which
So
you
that time I
remember?
was not in the writing line. We were a
Okay.
journalist, but in the archive section. The
Okay.
archive,
Okay.
only the Hindu and the Times of India have this elaborate archives, what they used to call the index department. So there,
Hmm.
every news in the last from the 100 years of or the history of the newspaper, every item is indexed. And when the
Hmm.
time comes, in fact, for the writing editorial or writing when you write a special story, for various reasons, that they are able to do that only because we are able to retrieve those news items. We
Right.
miss any time. So that's a very difficult kind of thing, but interesting job. So I was mostly in that. So I had no experience in this thing, reporting or editing. But later, when I joined the Indian Overseas Bank as an economist, then I had a lot of. I was the editor of all my magazines. I wrote the history of my bank. So there, I had a lot of writing to do.
Okay. Okay. So, what were the kind of subjects that you covered while you were writing?
That was basically finance and banking for the bank. And simultaneously, you can't say I didn't do one single job at a time.
Okay.
So when I was working with the Hindu also, I was working with a great economist called late Dr. B. Natarajan. So
Okay.
his was the very leading research institute in Chennai those days. It
Okay.
was called the Institute for Techno-Economic Studies. So he was kind of my godfather who put me into this writing, and as an economist, he made me that. So while I was working in Hindu, I still continued to work for him from 1976 to 1984 till his death. And he
Okay.
had a multifarious interest as an economist, as a Tamil writer, and as a very public spirited man. So we used to do so many things, in economics, in history, in Tamil writing, and that time only the whole idea of environment was coming to the fore, because many people don't realize that the Department of Environment started in 1985. They think that the environment after that only became popular. No,
Okay.
in fact, the Stockholm conference on the first environmental conference on Stockholm was held in '72, which was attended by, among others, by the Prime Minister Mrs. Gandhi, and she was very influenced by the deliberations, and she was very keen to do something for India, and that is why India was one of the few countries which took up the initiative on environment much before the rest of the world. And she was very keen to make a start in that direction. And there was no idea how to go about it. And first, what they did was to have a futurology cell in the as part of the Department of Science and Technology. So that was the time when they were trying to take a look at what the future lies for India in terms of the natural resources, in terms of population, in terms of its various economic parameters. Futurology cell was run by a Dr. Seth, S.C. Seth. So he came to know about our institute, and together, we did a lot of this, what you call the futurology workshops on pesticides, on transportation, etc., etc. So that I was able to get a footing in the field of environment, probably much earlier than many of the people in India could get it. So that I was able to do it side by side with my work in the Hindu.
Okay. So it's almost as if fate conspired to put you into an archiving role at the Hindu and then work with an economist who also looked at a whole lot of environmental aspects. It's uncanny how these things actually helped for you to drive what you're most well known for, which is the kind of campaign that you started in the Nilgiris. And of course, the whole point of understanding how John Sullivan was the person who really started off Ooty. But before we come to that, I want to understand what happened after the bank. What were the what was the next job that you took up, or what were the events that transpired?
It was during the bank because that's
Okay,
all. Like you said, it was a very happy all accident thing happening for the good only. How I
okay,
came to became an economist was an accident. How I became an environmental activist was an accident. Then how I became a journalist was also an accident. And then later only I realized that they all happened by design, by a divine
right,
design, because I was kind of God has given me made me the thing to lead an important campaign to when the problem came for Nilgiris in the 1980s, when the first time when the environmental question became a public issue. So then, by spontaneously, I was able to lead the movement. So luckily, though I was still working with the bank, and the bank cooperated with me or give me all kinds of cooperation, which normally you don't expect in an institution like
right.
banking. And incidentally, um, uh, in the 1980s, three important environmental movements started in Chennai.
Okay,
One was called what is called ex-Nora movement. It was a
right.
civic movement. And the second was the Save Nilgiris movement, focused on the Nilgiris. And the third was a group called the Poovulagin Nanbargal, Friends of the Earth. All three
Okay.
are still very active and very important movements. All three began in the Indian Overseas Bank. So that's interesting
Okay.
coincidence. We started with just our inspiration and our ideas.
When people say movements begin, they obviously it's like a stream. It's a trickle to begin with. So, what were the first things that you did? How did you get people interested? What did you do in order to bring them into the movement and to spread awareness?
No, that's because we were not a institution. We were just individuals, and we are
Right,
nothing but our common ideas. And normally we had no reasons to start these movements. We were more workers in the bank, but it all happened by itself. When the movement was started, problems in Ooty were getting out of hand. Then somebody suggested, "Why don't you do something? Because you are born in Ooty." I said, "What can I do? Save it." I said, "Yes, why not we start a Save Nilgiris campaign?" That's how it started. Then I said, "How will you do it?" They said, "How will I do it? I don't have money. I don't have people to bring together. What we can do is we can always write in the newspapers, because
okay,
writing was one thing we had. I had experience, and luckily we had a good connection with because of my father was a well-known journalist. The newspapers those days, they always they gave great encouragement for though it was all news
right,
new to them. I remember the Hindu, the Times of India, Economic Times, Financial Express, Business Standard. All of them allotted huge spaces for environmental news. That's when it became kind of public, this thing. Secondly, it was world over that movement was growing. The question of environment, the question of ecology, all that. So India was one of the countries where the government, the media, all of them, they jumped into the bandwagon quite early. So I was kind of lucky that we were able to get a break when I started this thing. So we
right.
were able to accomplish this without much of resources and manpower. And once it started, then we realized we are not the only person who was concerned. So it became a movement when people automatically took over, they
Right.
followed it. Everybody was trying to do something on their own, and all that we have to do is to kind of coordinate it.
Right. Amazing. So, what is the story of the Nilgiris Documentation Centre? How exactly did that come about?
The movement started in 1985. It had
Okay.
two things. Both were spontaneous. It happened on its own. One was the movement to save the Nilgiris. The other was the search for the John Sullivan. Both happened in
Right.
1985. I happened to meet an old journalist who was a good friend of my father, and suddenly the topic of John Sullivan came up. Then I said,
Okay.
"Who is the John Sullivan? Why nobody has ever heard of him in history, and nobody talks about him? And if we had really done so much, why people don't know about it or talk about it?" Then he said very casually, "Who remembers the good man?" And
Wow.
those words were very, I think later on I realized how powerful there. Yeah, who remembers a good man? Then I thought God has given me a chance to remember him. Then I started. It was a long search. It has taken me 40 years now to bring him out, not fully, but to a large extent. So these two, the movement to save the hills and the search for this thing, both simultaneously proceeded from 85. Then by 2000, we were a little tired because of activism. We took up so many causes and everything has been well documented. The urban problem, the switch over from vegetables to tea, and several, the dams which were unnecessarily coming up, and factories which were trying to come up in wildlife areas. So many issues we have taken up, and we were able to. I can happy to say that we were fairly successful because we were able to convince these people that what they might be doing is may not be good for the long run. So these things were going on. Then by 2006, we realized, of course, we can't be doing this activism all along. We are also getting age. So what we can do is we must document first the history, the environmental movement, everything, so that in future generations can take over from there. They need not have to start from scratch. So that was the idea of documenting the Nilgiri Documentation Centre. One is to bring together, because Nilgiri history is very well documented, culture, everything, from the British time and later also. But unfortunately, these materials are scattered all over the world, in
Okay.
London, in Paris, America, in various libraries of the world. So we thought it is our duty to bring together all this information of Nilgiris scattered all over the world and do some original research field work in the Nilgiris about the various indigenous people, starting from my own community, the Badagas, and the rest of the tribes. So this collection of this material that has given rise to this documentation center, and still it's a small effort, but we have done fairly good collection of the material, which is being used both by the government and by scholars.
It's amazing how one passionate and dedicated person can make such a difference, because people normally start by saying, I'm just one man, I'm just one person. But the singular efforts that you continued with, I'll come to the Sullivan story a little later, but I'm amazed that you had the stamina to follow up and keep documenting things that you felt future generations would benefit from. That is not common. Most people are looking at their own lives and, ambitions, whereas you said that I want to create a storehouse of information that future generations can benefit from. Why do you think that it is not, almost as an understanding of this is the environment we grow up in? This is the kind of world that we live in. And it's important that future generation understand. So, what do you think drove you? Was it that your father's, the fact that he was a journalist, he understood the Nilgiris, his love for the Nilgiris, transmitted itself to you?
Yeah, by one thing is by nature, I like to help. It is in my blood. To helping
Okay.
others, helping the cause is natural. Then the circumstances luckily helped me. One is my father's selfless life. I've seen him, he's been almost a legend in Nilgiris, and he was a self-made man. And as long as I remember, he was always, interested or even committed to the public life. Or he never thought, I don't remember ever he talking about our family, what we are going to do, what thing. It was always what is happening to the society. And
Okay.
24 hours a day, we used to hear only that. So probably that definitely would have influenced me. And my other godfather, Dr. Natarajan, he was also a very rare, different kind of economist, and who titled his biography as "Economics is not all." So he realized, life is much more than economics, much more than environment, understanding and people. So these two influences and definitely played a very big role into me. And then I realized I was not a studious person. I never was much read in younger days. But after my joining, taking up activism, catch up with my reading, then I realized, how much these people, earlier people, during the British rule and others, they have done for Nilgiris, for environment, kind of work they had put in. So then realized that if they could do so much for some foreigners who was by accidentally they had come here, and when they could do so much for a place, for generations we have been in Nilgiris, and what we should be at least, a little bit, compared to them, what we have done is nothing, but at least, we must try to do something. Personally, I may not have done much firsthand. I wanted to bring together all these writings. Luckily we
Great.
have now fairly have a good collection of books on Nilgiris dating from last 200 years. And these are difficult, today because thanks to the internet, we are able to access things. But those days, it was very, very difficult to get information or to access a book or access a report. So, or for that matter, to access a news story. So, but then painstaking only did it.
So, give
And
me
like
an instance of how you traced a particular book or some book came your way. Was it by going into, the local residents and finding out about their ancestors or whatever it is, generations? How did you get some of those books?
in the beginning, we hardly had any idea what Nilgiris is about, and many people had a wrong conception. It has hardly any history. So we
Okay.
have it was much even we have heard very vaguely. But there was a gazetteer, there was a manual. Where to get this? The books were dating. One was 1880, the other was 1906, and the famous Ootacamund History by Friedrich
Okay.
Price, which is considered a kind of monumental work on Nilgiris. We have seen it very. I believe the original. There were only a few number of copies printed. Because of my father, I think he borrowed it from some library. We had seen, had a glance of it. But then we thought, these books were beyond our reach and we couldn't get it. And what a break. I was once in Presidency College, gone to visit some person, and there was a library and there was a staircase. It was broken staircase. And to support that broken case, what I found? Suddenly I looked down, there's the book, Ootacamund History. They're given it as a support.
God.
Then I asked him, what is this? This is some old book, sir. Then I said, can I take it? Can take it too, it's all old only. Then I remember paying him 10 rupees. I think today that book is priceless. So we are able to, that's kind of break I had with the this thing.
And to an extent, it shows you that if you make that effort of keeping your ears and eyes open and you seek, in some way, a road opens up because you're seeking. In a sense, that's philosophical. But I think in your case, you were at some point very clear that this is what you wanted to establish. And somehow everything conspired to work out in a way that helped you do it. Your effort, of course, was, the biggest aspect of the whole thing. But it's wonderful how this whole thing came together, and now there is a resource which future generations, like the person who wrote Ootacamund History, would not have believed would be rescuing it and bringing it back into a position from where future generations can. So it's almost like a link between 200 years. You were the one who helped to bring it about, which is amazing.
Very true, very true. See, many times, we don't realize, it's not that, it's like somebody pushing me from behind. I can't go do anything more because it is too, I mean, already created a lot of problem for me and my family. But still, some force was always pushing me. Go, okay, one more thing, one more job. And now, before I realized, I spent already 40 years on that thing, and I'm still not satisfied. Uh, I would say at the best, I would have brought in about, say, 20-30% of the Nilgiri material. So still it's a fraction only. So the work still that remains to be done is huge, and you can't take rest now. Having done so much, so you have to catch up with whatever is possible and bring together. And
Okay,
but can't finish up the job, but you have to, it's and now thanks to the internet, it keeps you keep digging, it keeps coming, endlessly. And each
right,
time I spend about 2-3 hours on the net. And if you go into the information news item and what all things that have happened in Nilgiris and how Nilgiris is connected with the national, international events so intimately. Many people think a hill station is just a quiet place without any event or this thing. It is totally wrong. During the colonial period and after that also, several national, international events have their links to Nilgiris.
Nilgiris.
Recently, I've been writing 2-3 notes because on demand. One is
Okay,
the long Nilgiri Australia connection, Aussie connection. That's a 200-year-old connection. And recently, one a local lady who teaches French in New York, she came. Nilgiri, she wanted to get about Nilgiri French connection. So that we were
okay,
able to do now. And there is the Nilgiri Canadian connection. There's so many connections, and each one is unique, and very interesting also. To create a modern Nilgiris, almost most of the European countries and America, Canada, and they have had their contributions. So which is rare in the world. With
right.
people, that's another reason for my documentation.
Wonderful. There are two things that I want to go more deeply into because you started with John Sullivan. Can you tell us that story of how he discovered or he opened out the potential of the Nilgiris and what you were able to find out about him?
I would suggest, there is some kind of connection between God's creation of Sullivan and me because both of us didn't do it on our own, but there was a force behind it. So Sullivan, he didn't probably, he had no idea of discovering Nilgiris or doing it because he became a collector in Coimbatore in 1815. And Nilgiris and Coimbatore had come into the control of the British in 1800. So for 15 years, nobody, and in fact, one or two people had visited Nilgiris and they were not much impressed. But when it came to the Sullivan, he had to come to Coimbatore just 1 year before, that is 1814, for an
Okay.
inquiry. Because there was what the very popular case called the Kasi Chetty case. There was a
Okay.
lot of misuse in the revenue system, and Sir Thomas Munro and John Sullivan were deputed to have an inquiry and prepare a report. So after that, probably he preferred Coimbatore, or the East India Company okayed it. He became the collector of Nilgiris in 1815. So still about 4 years, he couldn't give time for enough time for Nilgiri, exploring Nilgiris. Because he had read about the previous visits and he was half-minded. But suddenly, out of inspiration, he said, "Why not go and see for myself?" So then only he deputed two of his surveyors, and who also gave not a very rosy picture. But then in 1819, he himself took an exploration to the Nilgiris. And what he saw convinced him. He said it is totally different, and here is where a new settlement, a new this thing could be created. After that, he was relentless. He applied all his energy in his personal capacity and as a government thing to he was kind of obsessed with by the idea of creating for the very first hill station of the British Empire in India. So
Okay.
that kind of passion, took some time, but it finally came true.
Okay. And then he actually went further in terms of the various levels, the heights. He first found Kotagiri. What is the story there? That Ooty was kind of, discovered a little later, or he found Ooty and then settled there.
His first stop was in Kotagiri, because
Okay.
that was the only route. Those now the present place of Sirumugai in Coimbatore. So that was where the old trail started, and it came through Kotagiri, Kil Kotagiri, and Kotagiri proper. And he saw the Dimbati Valley where the John Sullivan Memorial is, and he liked the valley, and he pitched camp there, and he wanted to have a small settlement. That was in 1819. And the very next year, he got married. He got married in Chennai. His wife was also from Chennai. She belonged to Veperi. And second visit, he was more impressed because a very interesting incident happened. Very famous French botanist. He was not feeling well. He had several problems. He had half a mind to join Sullivan on his second expedition, but
Okay.
Sullivan finally convinced him to come with him. And the moment they reached Ooty, Kotagiri area, the French botanist suddenly seemed to have recovered fully. So,
Okay.
and within a day, he was quite normal, and he went about exploring the botanical thing, like a year. So then Sullivan had an idea. There must be something to the air. Because how could a
Okay.
person who has not been doing well for so many months suddenly,
Cover.
that convinced him further. So that we should have a kind of a British settlement here. And thirdly,
Okay.
Sullivan himself was not a very healthy person. So for every sake, he said, why not have a break in the mountains? The hill stations were well known to the British through their surveys. But what they thought was the hill stations were not conducive for the constitution of the British, because they were scared of diseases like malaria, cholera. So they deliberately avoided hill stations. But Sullivan, they said, no, it could be the other way around. He went out of the way to found a hill station, because by the time he started and by the time officially it became a hill station, it was about 7 8 years. So all through the 7 8 years, it was his personal initiative which developed the Ooty. This thing. First, he started Kotagiri. Then after 2 years, he happened to see the Ooty Valley, which was much more conducive. Then he decided to have the settlement in the Ooty Valley. He bought about 100 acres of land where the present stone house. He built the first house there. Then he brought a farmer, army man, Scottish man from London. Then he introduced all the English vegetables because the idea was to attract the English settlement. He must have a typical English atmosphere. So he introduced the English vegetables, English fruits, English flowers, so many things. So that itself took
Right.
about 7, 8 years for him
Okay.
before the British East India Company could officially declare Ooty as a hill station.
Okay. It's amazing how step by step these things happened, and he had such a major influence. What about the tea estates? Was Sullivan instrumental in getting tea into the Nilgiris?
Yes, he had a role, very major role. But see, by the time 1834, some many things have happened, and he had become a member of the Revenue Board in Chennai,
Okay.
the Madras presidency. But he had a choice of having his residence at Ooty. So it was that time, 1934, a major event happened. The Governor General of India, uh, William Bentinck, was unwell and he came to Nilgiris for a rest and he stayed there for nearly 9 months. And the Bentinck family happened to be a family friend of the Sullivans also. Because so that time,
Okay.
just before he came here, there was a kind of a tea problem in the India. So till that time, the British were getting tea free from China, importing tea. But because of the opium wars, the tea imports were stopped. China was not prepared to export tea to in exchange for opium. So, government, as required by the East India Company, they constituted a tea committee. The idea was to explore any indigenous variety of tea in India, and mostly
Okay.
in Darjeeling and Assam areas. So at that time, since the Governor General was in Nilgiris, probably Sullivan convinced him to explore the southern part of India also. Mysore and Nilgiris were included in the exploration. And after a year or two of experimentation, Mysore was given up, and Nilgiris was also given up, saying that it is not conducive for tea. So it was
Okay.
at that time, which is around 1838, there was a tragedy in the life of John Sullivan.
Okay.
Both his wife and his first daughter died within a week, and
Oh.
Sullivan decided to leave India for good. But before he left Nilgiris, Ooty, because the last house that he stayed was in a place called Lovedale. It was called the Richins Lodge, named after the house he was born in London. So nearby only the tea was one of the places where the earliest experimentation was made in Ooty was in a place called Katy. And Katy and Lovedale was their neighboring areas. So as Sullivan was leaving Ooty for good, he picked up some of the saplings which has grown, which are not very well, but it has grown somewhat grown. Took them to Chennai. He dried it in the sun. Then he manually fried it and prepared some teas and sent it to the Agri Horticulture Society. It was one of the oldest society in, and that the experts they said is very good tea. So
Okay.
that is how the hope for tea was revived. So it was again
Okay.
another 5, 6 years till tree was widely grown, and still some more years till the factories came up and first Nilgiri tea was made. But it was Sullivan's kind of inspiration. He played a role, saying that
No,
gave
that's
the
a
thing.
very important bit because ultimately
Today,
it's about the tea being available, but then it has to pass tests and be
it has
certified.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He has to
which is
make it, After growing tea is one
right,
thing, but producing
right,
tea is another. He was
right,
able to
right,
go everything personally. Normally, an official would not bother too much, so he will just follow the government orders and just report what happened. But in Sullivan's
right.
case, in every aspect of Nilgiris, he took a personal interest. So that is why he is remembered so widely now.
And the results are there for everyone to see. You have a very close relationship with overall growth and the survival of the tea industry because of an intervention that you brought about in 2004. Can you tell us how that started? What is the issue? And what was your role in it?
Yeah, tea has had an ups and downs in Nilgiris. See, basically it was a plantation crop, so it was remained so for many years. First, the Britishers were the pioneers; they opened up the plantations. Then, after independence, gradually it changed hands and came into the Indian corporates and individuals. But there was no concept of small growers at that time. But around 1970s, what happened was the potato, which was the staple for the small cultivators of Nilgiris, mainly the Badagas, the market was very fluctuating and the price was
Okay.
very uncertain. So they were kind of desperate situation. Then at that time, the Tea Board of India, they mooted a plan. Why can't the small cultivators can also switch over to tea and become tea growers? The idea of tea board was to increase the acreage under tea for the country because that was our main export earner and main foreign exchange earner. So the government of India supported them. They did that, and to convince the small growers, and they even subsidized the tea plantation because the first few years till the plant grows, there won't be any income. So they were kind of subsidized, giving them some kind of subsidy for 2 3 years. So all these encouraged a shift from potato to tea. So
Okay.
that's what potato has been the staple for 100 years, but suddenly they were shifting to tea. This is a totally different crop. One was a food crop, another is a cash crop. And that time there was a big windfall because after the breakup of the USSR, Russia, there was a huge demand for tea in general and Nilgiri tea in particular. So that shot up the price of the green leaf from 5 to 6 rupees to 30 rupees or so. Huge incentive for shifting from potato to tea. So everyone, then the tea board convinced people, see, once you do the shifting, forever you can get the income. There's nothing to worry about. You need not, depend on the market fluctuation and all that. But what happened was after a few years, the Russian crisis was got over and the Russian demand collapsed and the tea prices fell. So this was something in around 1998 or so. That plunged the whole Nilgiri community because by the time the Nilgiri small growers were used to a very good income from tea. And suddenly when the tea prices plummeted, there was a huge crisis because everybody has invested too much in depending on the price of tea. So that led to what we call the tea crisis. That led to a huge social crisis also. There were agitations, and the Ooty flower show was cancelled once. The tourist inflow was stopped. Some 3 4 buses were torched. In 2000, the matters came to a head. So there was a big agitation, and the government had to use the police action to put down the agitation. An economic issue had become a big social issue.
Okay.
So I mean, nobody was everybody was confused how it started and what is the way out. And at that time, I had just returned from Hong Kong after a 3-year tenure with my bank. Then the crisis here was so high, when I couldn't help, intervening. I wanted to find out why the crisis has been allowed to grow to this extent. At the time, the government of Tamil Nadu, they said, see, your organization, the Save Nilgiris campaign, has got huge credibility. So only you can kind of intervene and bring the two sides together, the government and the growers and the stakeholders of the tea industry. So then at that time we had a major meeting in Ooty where all the stakeholders were brought together under our single umbrella. Why first we explored the whole thing. First of all, the background of tea as a plantation
Right.
crop, then I switch over to the small growers, then the Russian demand, how it collapsed, then the the tea industry's demand and supply, and competition from other countries like Kenya, Vietnam, and others. So it's a global problem. What we were facing was a global problem. For a plantation industry can manage, but when a small grower he gets caught in this global crisis, he's stranded. He doesn't know what to do, how to react. Called a meeting. Then the way out is uh, finally what we are growing is a very good product. Nilgiri teas are well known world over for their quality. So the way out for this crisis are two things. One is to market our teas directly instead of going through the auction process, which has got its own plus and minuses. Secondly, since we are not a very major big growing area, we should concentrate on value added teas, niche markets, something like this organic teas. And it was easier for a place like Nilgiris because it's a high grown area. In Assam, the tea is mostly grown on level ground. So level ground to switch over from inorganic to organic is difficult. But for in a hill area, it's easier. In 2-3 years, chemicals can be washed out, and it could be easily fully turned into an organic product. So at that time, when we made the suggestion, people were very reluctant to accept it because they thought that these things won't happen immediately. But luckily, we were able to convince them, and now it's about 20 years. The Nilgiri tea industry is by and large stabilized. At least about 50% of the teas are marketed directly, and many of the factories have switched over to high value teas like the organic tea. Not only tide over the crisis, it has brought about some kind of stability, and we are happy that we were able to play a small but crucial role.
You are making, you're playing it down in your own way, but in a life that has, straddled everything from learning about archiving to economics to activism to actually helping to preserve the entire ecosystem of the Nilgiris, a place that you love very dearly. It's a wonderful life and a wonderful career, Mr. Dharmalingam, because it's like you've been able to do something by yourself, which is marvelous. And the whole thing that started it, the single sentence where you said, "Who remembers a good man?" I think you have carried it forward, even if there was a 200-year gap in between,
Yeah.
because the man who was forgotten is now remembered. His contribution to the Nilgiris is remembered. You've helped to establish a brand that is known the world over. You have helped to deflate a crisis that threatened to engulf the whole industry. And even if people don't know the nuts and bolts of how this happened, it's wonderful that you've taken the time to explain this and let us understand where this whole thing has come from. This is not a career for everyone because it's not as if people will just get into activism
I
or
feel it's a
they
way of
focus
life.
on one thing.
It's
Yeah, it's
just
a
my
way
way
of
of life.
life. Yeah. So I'm so grateful to you for having taken the time and explaining this entire history and journey, which has so many interesting elements. And at the end of the day, it gives people something to really look back upon and create an economy that is now known the world over. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for giving me this rare opportunity where I could at least narrate what we have done, try to do. Thank you so much.
My pleasure and my honor, sir. I just spoke to Mr. Dharmalingam Venugopal, writer, activist. Um, I mean, it's hard to figure out how much he's actually done because when you see the work that he's done at the Nilgiris Documentation Centre and what he's managed to do, it's a life lived to the fullest. And this is a man who enjoys every bit of what he's done. Next week, another guest, another career, another show. Until then, keep watching and thank you for being on the show.